If there's one thing every Yo-kaiWatch fan can agree on when it comes to this franchise, it's that we have some absolute banger villains. Let's see. We've got an evil dictator who wants to whitewash and take over both the yokai and human worlds, a depressed old hag unable to find true love who now seeks to control past, present, and future, an Italian mobster obsessed with space who can snap his fingers and make people do his bada bidding, a literal treasure demon that can grant your innermost desires, and a demonic-looking version of Whisper. Truly a variety of antagonists we've got here. But if there's one villain who really stands out, it has to be the villain of Yo-kaiWatch 4, and its anime counterparts, Yo-kaiWatch Shadowside and Yo-kaiWatch Forever Friends. Although I'll mainly be addressing the game, as Shadowside and Forever Friends share major story elements with the former. Soranaki, otherwise known as the Overseer. He may not be as well known as his fellow villains, largely because he appears only in yokai media that hasn't been officially localized, but make no mistake, he's certainly one of the greats. However, unlike many previous yokai-watch villains, Soranaki isn't memorable because of a larger-than-life personality or comedic antics. What really makes him stand out is the story behind how he became this way, because Soranaki wasn't always some all-encompassing evil. At one point, he was just someone who had basically everything taken away from him. Today, I want to look at why Soranaki succeeds so well as a villain, why I think he's one of the strongest antagonists the franchise has ever produced, and why I genuinely believe he's Yo-kaiWatch's most tragic villain. Before he took on this monstrous form, Soranaki was a yokai named Kuten, or Seros in the localization. Long before the yokai world was ruled by the Enma lineage, it was governed by the Oni tribe. Among its most important figures were Princess Shuka, or Juno, her loyal bodyguards Gento, or Boreas, and Hakushu, Eurus, and of course, Seros himself. The four were incredibly close, and Seros even harbored feelings for the princess. Unfortunately, those bonds wouldn't last. Seros was suddenly accused of plotting to assassinate Shuka's father and was imprisoned for treason. But the tragedy is that he was completely innocent. A group of corrupt nobles wanted to seize control of the Oni kingdom. They manipulated Seros into retrieving the legendary Kenbu Majin blades, then framed him as the mastermind behind a coup, claiming he intended to use the weapons to murder the king. Believing these rumors, Shuka imprisoned the very yokai who had devoted his life to protecting her. It's a heartbreaking misunderstanding, because nobody involved, outside of the instigators, acted out of malice. Seros was manipulated. Shuka believes she's trying to protect her kingdom, and Shuka's other bodyguards are trying to protect her from this apparent threat. Meanwhile, the real villains quietly get exactly what they wanted. As the years passed, Seros remained locked away beneath the kingdom. The friends he trusted never came for him. The woman he loved so much had betrayed him. Left completely alone, his grief slowly morphed into resentment, and that resentment became hatred, and eventually that very hatred transformed him into the monstrous dark sun we know as Soranaki. And that hatred didn't just consume him, it became contagious. Soranaki's grudge was so powerful that it infected other yokai, feeding on the darkness already hidden within them. Even the reigning yokai king, Shuka's own father, fell victim to it, becoming so corrupted that Shuka was ultimately forced to kill him herself. Only centuries later, after Gento and Hakushu had been reincarnated as Toma and Akinori, and Shuka herself had returned as Natsume, was the truth finally uncovered, and Seros' name was finally cleared. And after centuries of suffering, he was finally able to let go of the hatred that had defined his existence, allowing him to peacefully reincarnate, and finally escape the cycle of grief that had consumed him for so long. I think that's what elevates Soranaki beyond being just another world-ending villain. He's not evil solely because of a lust for power, he's evil because his entire life was stolen from him. Now you could argue that this is just another version of Dame Deadtime's backstory from Yo-kaiWatch 2. After all, both characters were falsely accused of crimes they didn't commit, unjustly imprisoned, and eventually transformed into embodiments of hatred whose grudges corrupted other yokai. On paper, the similarities are definitely there, but personally, I think Soranaki does it miles better. And the biggest reason is that Soranaki isn't just defined by his tragic backstory, his tragedy becomes the emotional backbone of the entire game, even if not apparent for most of the story. Throughout Yo-kaiWatch 4, Natsume's story revolves around discovering that she's the reincarnation of Princess Shuka, she experiences disturbing visions of her previous life, haunted by memories of Soranaki, long before she ever meets him in the present. At the same time, Toma and Akinori discover that they're the reincarnations of Shuka's loyal bodyguards. In the finale, the game constantly draws parallels between these two groups, showing that even after hundreds of years and multiple reincarnations, the bonds they once shared never truly disappeared. Meanwhile, we actually see how Soranaki's influence affects yokai in the latter half of the game. And funnily enough, this is another area where Yo-kaiWatch 4 echoes Yo-kaiWatch 2. In both games, the main villain's hatred spreads to other yokai, corrupting them into enemies the player has to overcome. But I think Yo-kaiWatch 4 gets much more mileage out of this idea because of its darker and more mature tone. Throughout the latter half of the game, you really see Soranaki's influence spread further and further across the world. He forcibly turns yokai into their monstrous shadow side forms, and even corrupts major characters as the game follows. Doketsu gets affected, and Shutendoji is forced to kill his own servant, who had followed him as a partner throughout thick and thin. The party faces off against an evil version of Lord Kyra, who seemingly sacrifices himself, before revealing that he's totally fine. Despite not physically appearing until the penultimate chapter, Soranaki's presence is felt throughout almost the entire game. He doesn't just show up at the end of the adventure as a surprise. The story is constantly reminding you that he's there. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons he works so well. I mean, compare that to Yo-kaiWatch 1, where McCracken more or less appears at the end with very little build-up. He's a fun final boss, but he doesn't really shape the story beforehand. Even Dame Deadtime, as fantastic as she is, doesn't have quite the same narrative integration as I think she maybe deserves compared to Soranaki. Yo-kaiWatch 2 is ultimately about Nate or Katie spending time with their grandfather, and showing that humans and yokai become stronger through friendship. The wicked yokai serve as memorable antagonists, but they aren't the emotional core of the story. On top of that, Dame Deadtime's tragic backstory wasn't even included in Bony Spirits or Fleshy Souls. Unless you played Psychic Spectres, you never really learned why she became the villain in the first place. Soranaki doesn't have that problem. His tragedy isn't hidden away in an enhanced version. It's literally the core story of the game, and I think that's what makes him such a memorable antagonist. Of course, a tragic backstory can only get a villain so far. If the audience never feels intimidated by them in the present, all that emotional weight risks falling flat. Thankfully, Yo-kaiWatch 4 absolutely nails Soranaki's presentation. Every Yo-kaiWatch villain has their own unique aesthetic that makes them memorable, from McCracken's corruptive white, to the Wicked's dark, evil purple, to the Ghoulfather's mob boss aesthetic with the ghoulies and his whole bada-bing tower, to Soranaki's terrifying black and dark red. Or neon green in the Chinese localization? Yeah, that was weird. Personally, I thought that the Ghoulfather's aesthetic was my favorite, but honestly, I just love Soranaki's the most. The Ghoulfather's is the most creative by far, but Soranaki's is just a lot more intimidating and menacing. It also doesn't help that red and black have been some of my favorite colors, with red being my first favorite and black being my current favorite. Call me basic, but hey, I just think he looks neat. Soranaki's design is also very intriguing. It fits very well with the shadow side theming, but it looks ever so out of place in Alien. He has a cape-like appendage with the aesthetic of the backdrop of space, and his body is a giant gaping maw with fiery veins protruding from the center, as well as fire-like patterns on the skin, as he is a sun after all. His arms are pretty thin though, and he can be seen wielding a giant spear sometimes. For his final boss fight, he undergoes an intriguing transformation, and turns into a more humanoid Oni-like form like Princess Shuka, represented by the new horns that sprout from his head, and the armor he wears on his torso. He still keeps the cape-like appendages though, tying it back to the original design. It's a pretty refreshing take compared to other Yo-kaiWatch villains, who tend to get bigger, badder, and uglier for their final forms. While Soranaki starts out as this massive alien presence that metamorphosizes into a more humanoid form. Even his entrance at the start of the final boss is pretty epic, with Soranaki menacingly looming over the present uptown Springdale, and his malignant aura at full force, causing all the yokai in the city to go haywire, hovering above Mount Wildwood's Krenkakai, and then releasing a single tear of doom that absorbs all of Soranaki's life energy into one giant energy bomb that transforms him into his final form, and drops him onto the ground so hard it causes literal shockwaves. Finally, he conjures a blue flame from his palm that he transforms into a blade, and then lunges directly face first into the camera, triggering the final battle. The music for both this penultimate and final boss are also very fitting, and fit well against the lineup of other boss themes. His main theme that you hear when you fight him in Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 is dramatic, grand, and epic, complete with fast-paced drums, some guitar, and orchestral strings and trumpets. It's very epic, and honestly one of my favorite Yo-kaiWatch themes in general. However, his final boss theme goes for a very high octane and desperate melody, almost mirroring Don Spiracy's theme from Yo-kaiWatch 3. It really fits the whole now or never feel of the fight, with a lot of tension as to if our heroes can win against this seemingly undefeatable foe. The final theme of his, once Lord Enma returns and gives our heroes a fighting chance, is naturally more uplifting, blending both the main Yo-kaiWatch theme and Enma's theme into a spiritual successor to this game's counterattack theme. It's a great final theme and another one of the series' best. For me, all of these elements in its design, accompanying music, and overall presentation combine to make Soranaki an unforgettable villain. Unfortunately, he's not exactly perfect in his execution. If there's one small genuine critique I have of Soranaki, it's that for how great he is, he felt a bit overused. Just in the span of a year, we got the Shadowside anime, Forever Friends, and Yo-kaiWatch 4, which all use Soranaki as their final antagonist. Shadowside I get, as it's the backbone of Soranaki's story. Yo-kaiWatch 4 is the game adaptation of that, so I can't really criticize it that much. But Forever Friends? I don't know. That kind of crosses the line for me. And it's not really like he personally adds anything to the story, aside from being an obstacle for our heroes to overcome and grow from. Unfortunately, this wouldn't even be the last we'd see of Soranaki. A couple of years later, Y School Heroes Season 2 aired, featuring an additional story beyond the game in Season 1. During a pivotal battlefield scene, our heroes are fighting their rivals when Soranaki suddenly emerges from the ground. Yep, you heard that right. The writers must have taken notes from the Rise of Skywalker and said, somehow Soranaki returned. In universe, this makes a small percentage of sense. Y Academy takes place many years after Shadowside, so a resurrected version of the evil side of Soranaki through some form of dark magic is chronologically possible. The problem is, the show never really bothers to explain this, and Soranaki, for being a major franchise antagonist, is once again used more like a tool, not even for any meaningful character development, rather than actually contributing to the show in any way. I'll be discussing this more in a future video, so stay tuned for that. After spending so much time peeling back the layers of Soranaki's tragedy, seeing him return as little more than just a powerful monster feels like a major step backwards. Still, as frustrating as those later appearances can be, they don't erase what made Soranaki so effective in the first place. If anything, the fact that his latter appearance feels so hollow only proves how much Yo-kaiWatch 4 got right. Soranaki isn't memorable simply because he's powerful, intimidating, or attached to one of the darkest stories in the franchise. He's memorable because underneath all the monstrosity, he's still Seros. He was someone who tried to do the right thing, yet was manipulated and betrayed by the people he held close, and left alone long enough for that pain to consume him completely. By the time we meet Soranaki, almost nothing of Seros appears to remain. He became this enormous, apocalyptic force capable of corrupting yokai and threatening the entire world. But the finale reveals that the monster was never the whole story. Beneath the Black Sun was someone who spent centuries trapped inside a betrayal he never deserved. That's what makes his defeat so satisfying. The heroes don't just stop Soranaki, they uncover the truth, restore Seros' identity, and finally give him the chance to let go. Other Yo-kaiWatch villains may be funnier, more charismatic, or even more creative. Dame Dead Time comes close in terms of tragedy, and The Ghoulfather still has one of the most entertaining aesthetics in the series. But for me, none of them bring together story, presentation, scale, and emotional payoff quite as effectively as Soranaki. And that is why Soranaki is Yo-kaiWatch's most tragic villain. Thanks for watching.